"What do you think's down there?" Julian asked as he leaned over the open hatch. From where we were stood, on the high sand berm, we could see down to the floor, but nowhere else. The interior walls were concrete and covered in graffiti all the way down the 15-foot shaft. "Probably like a dead homeless guy or something," Dylan said. He laughed when he said it to prove that that kind of thing didn't scare him. There were thick metal posts sticking out from one side of the concrete where the ladder used to be, but the rungs were no longer attached. Lewis crawled over to the edge and started lowering his legs down onto the first set. "Dude, what are you doing?" I asked, hoping he wasn't planning to climb down there. If he did it, we'd all have to follow, and I really did not want to. He looked up at me as if my question was stupid. "Gonna go check it out. Might be something cool down there. It's obviously safe if other people climb down here to spray graffiti, right?" He replied with the perfect confidence of my best friend. It was only the second step down when he lost his footing and slipped. We three above watched through the hatch as he tumbled the rest of the 10 or so feet down, hitting the bottom with a thud. "Lewis!" I shouted, which was followed by several other calls down the tube to him. His body looked so big, crumpled in that narrow shaft. He didn't move for what felt like an hour. In my heart, I knew he was dead, and his mother would never forgive me. But he wasn't dead. I heard a groan and Lewis rolled over. There was blood. The bright sun streamed down almost directly into the hatch, and his face looked pale when he looked up at us. "Are you okay?" Julian yelled down to him. There was fear in his question, because we all knew he wasn't okay. Yeah, I think so," Lewis responded. He pushed himself into a near-sitting position. I prepared to climb down to help him. My fear of the place disappeared now that my friend was in trouble. I scanned the ladder remnants and noticed that they only went down a few steps before totally disappearing. This fact had somehow escaped Lewis when he decided to climb down. I could see all my friends coming to the same realization I just had. He wasn't going to climb out the way he'd gone down. "Maybe there's another way out," Julian suggested. But we'd been climbing all over the old missile site all morning, and this was the only hatch we found. Maybe it hadn't been covered over with tons of dirt like everything else had when it was abandoned, or maybe the wind had freed it over time. Either way, it was the sole access point. "I don't think Lewis should be wandering around down there without knowing how to get out. He could get lost. Who knows how many tunnels there might be," I said. "We've got to go back to town and get a ladder or a rope or something," Dylan said, leaning back from the hatch and speaking a little quieter than before. "Maybe we should just call the fire department or something. They can get him out," I suggested. But that was immediately and roundly rejected. "Screw that. Just get something to lift me out with." Even Lewis wasn't down for the fire rescue. He sounded fine. So we decided to drive back to town. "Will one of you guys toss me down the phone before you go, so I at least have a light? My phone got smashed when I fell," he asked. None of us wanted to part with our phones, so we made a silent agreement. Rock, paper, scissors. Julian lost, and he reluctantly dropped his down the hole. "Hang tight, bro. We'll be back," he said, and we all piled into Dylan's janky Toyota and hauled ass back to town. We spent at least an hour trying to figure out a way to load Dylan's parents' ladder into his car without looking too suspicious, before we decided to just get a rope. It was mid-afternoon by the time we got back to the old missile silo. "Lewis!" Julian shouted as we neared the hatch. His lack of response was the first indication that something was wrong. But we didn't start to panic until we saw that he wasn't sitting down there at the bottom of the hole where we'd left him. Maybe he just moved into the tunnel to get out of the sun and, passed out or something. Someone will have to go down there to help him back up," Dylan suggested. Julian and I got ready for rock, paper, scissors, but Dylan didn't throw in. "It's my car we always drive around, and it's my dad's rope, so I think it's fair if one of you guys do it," he said. When I protested, he had a response. "Don't be a pussy, Juan. Just throw," he said angrily. There wasn't any point arguing, so we went without him. I lost. They helped tie the rope to my waist, and soon I was walking down the concrete wall with the help of my friends on the other end. It was noticeably cooler down there, even in the shaft of sun. It had been so bright above that it took a few long seconds for my eyes to adjust. There was a single, short and narrow hallway at the base of the hole. The light bounced off the pale concrete, and I could see about 15 feet down the hall. My friend wasn't within those 15 feet. "Lewis," I called. He didn't answer. "He's not down here," I told my friends back up at the surface. I heard them talking, but couldn't really make out the words. "He's got to be down there, dude. Just look for him. He might be hurt," Julian shouted down to me. He was right. Maybe Lewis was looking for another way out since it took us so long to get back. I flipped the light on my phone and started slowly walking. The tunnel turned a few times, but never otherwise changed. It was just a featureless, concrete-walled path. "Lewis?" I called for him as I slowly walked deeper and deeper into the underground compound. I came to a crossroads. I started marking notes into my phone so I would remember the way back, when it occurred to me that Lewis had Julian's phone. I texted the number, and sure enough, I heard the faint jingle of Julian's alert. It wasn't far. I made a left turn and walked maybe 20 feet, then texted again. I followed the path through several more curves. Around one last turn, I came upon a figure slumped against the concrete. "Lewis?" I asked, but he didn't move. I rushed to him, fearing he was dead, but to my surprise, he turned his head when I neared. He was pale and shaking. "Juan?" he asked, scanning my face for recognition. I helped him to his feet, which he took unsteadily. "Yeah, Lewis, it's me. We got a rope to get you out. Are you okay? Can you walk?" I asked him, checking his legs. He nodded and took a couple shaky steps. I led him slowly back the way I had come. "What happened? Why did you go in so far?" I asked as we walked. "I don't know. I just got lost," he said quietly. "But why did you go anywhere? We told you we were coming back for you," I scolded. His eyes shot to mine for a brief second before quickly dropping away before I could read them. "I don't know. I got confused. I was just looking for a way out," he stammered. I started to wonder if he had hit his head, and the thought urged me to move faster. My battery was at 15% when I spotted the faint glow of sunlight ahead. "Julian? Dylan?" I shouted as we neared. Suddenly, Lewis screamed and wheeled several steps back. I reached for his arm to steady him, but he yanked it away. He tumbled to the concrete and crawled backwards where he had just been. "Lewis!" I shouted, quickly overtaking him. I grabbed him tightly and gave him a quick shake. "Lewis, what are you doing?" I asked. We were back in the darker part of the tunnel, and my phone was pressed against my hand and his shoulder. But in the dim light, his face was a mask of utter terror. His eyes were wide, and his lips were curled so far away from his teeth that they disappeared. "Lewis!" I shouted and shook him again. His eyes found mine, and he seemed to calm slightly. "I can't go up there," he whispered. The intensity of his voice frightened me to the point that I actually thought I shouldn't go up there either. But that was stupid. What are you talking about? Dylan and Julian are waiting to pull us out. Let's go. If we don't, they're probably going to call the fire department or the cops to come out here to rescue us, dude. I insisted. Lewis just shook his head, staring towards the light. You want to have the cops to have to rescue us? I asked him sternly. His eyes darted from the light back towards the way we had come, as if he might run back down there. No, he whispered. Come on, we're almost there. I pulled him gently to the hanging rope. My friends were leaning over the hatch, and they yelled down at us when they saw us. Hurry up, you assholes. Tie off and we'll pull you up, Dylan said. And what the hell took so long? Julian added. Soon I was watching Lewis, rope around his waist, walk unsteadily up the wall and disappear. A minute later, we were all reunited on the surface. The sun was moving toward the west, and it felt pleasantly warm up there. Let's get the hell out of here. My parents are going to take my keys away if I don't get back for dinner, Dylan said. So we loaded into his car, and he dropped us off in turn to our homes. Lewis insisted he didn't need to go to the hospital, and that he wasn't hurt in the fall. But that didn't seem possible. We didn't want to cause him grief, so we just let it go. I was hesitant, thinking about how he had acted when I tried to get him up the hatch, but I decided to chalk all the weirdness up to him having a bad scare. When Lewis didn't show up for class the next day, though, I got worried. I went straight to his house after school, but his mother told me he was fine, just feeling a bit sick. It was a full 2 weeks before she finally let me see him. She led me up to his room, but hesitated before opening the door. It seemed like she wanted to tell me something, but she never did. When she swung the door open, I was hit by a horrible smell. A mix of unwashed teenager and rancid food. It was dark inside. The windows were taped up with posters and random pieces of paper, and even the sheets from his bed. Lewis was sitting on his striped bed, staring off at nothing. He wasn't wearing a shirt. He looked like he had lost nearly 30 pounds, and he wasn't that big of a guy to start with. Lewis? I asked hesitantly. The whole scene was sort of freaking me out. Close the door, he whispered. I looked back to where his mother was still standing. She shook her head. She wasn't about to leave us alone, and that struck me as odd. I'd been to that house 1,000 times before and hung out with Lewis in his room alone, but this was different. Something had happened. Lewis, I have your homework. When do you think you're coming back to school? I asked, approaching the bed. He didn't look at me. His face was terribly thin, but his skin was pulled tightly across his cheeks, like he had just enough of it left to cover his bones. There was something very wrong with my friend. Dude, are you okay? I took a step closer. His mother was still standing by the door, as if she was guarding him. I heard the ring of a phone and watched as she tried to decide whether to keep supervising us or to answer it. She relented and took the call, but she didn't go far. Doctor, you have to get him in. He can't stay here. He's getting worse. He needs help. She started getting heated and took a step further into the hall when she saw me watching her. I touched Lewis's arm gently, and he looked up at me finally. His eyes were dark and sunken and painted. It took Ma, he whispered to me. Mariana? What are you talking about? I asked, and it occurred to me that I hadn't seen his sister at school in a couple of days. She's down there now, in the tunnel, he said. Mom won't listen to me, but I know it took her. It followed me out, and now it's got my little sister, he said. His voice cracked with emotion. Lewis grabbed my hand suddenly, startling me. There was an intensity in his eyes that scared me. Juan, you have to help me. We have to get her out of there, like you got me out, he said, drawing very close to me. The police. We have to call the police, I said. He shook his head. They don't believe me. Mom called them, and they said Ma probably just got mad and took off, and she'll be back. But I know where she is, he said. They all think I'm crazy, that I hit my head, but I'm not. You believe me, don't you? Lewis gripped me even tighter, as if he could force that belief into me with his hands. Lewis. I started to try to talk some sense into him, but tears began streaming down his cheeks. He was desperate. Please, Juan, you're the only other one who has been down there. We have to find her, he insisted. I thought about Lewis's younger sister. Ma was not the kind of girl who would just take off. She's a star runner on the track team and a straight-A student. She's never been in any kind of trouble and gets along with everyone. I knew she wouldn't just take off. Okay. I'll go take a look. I'll get her out if she's down there, I said, though I wasn't really planning to. Lewis shook his head. I have to go with you. I know where it took her, he said, growing more and more frantic. Where what took her? I asked, and he finally let go of my arm. He looked away. I don't know what it is, but it's down there, and it'll hurt her. I have to go. We have to go, he said, more quietly now. This time, I shook my head. Lewis, you're not going to be able to climb down there. You're barely skin and bones. You look anorexic. You have to get some rest and regain your strength. I'm worried about you, I said. I have to go. He raised his voice again, and it was taken on a pitch that was high and desperate. I was scared for my friend, but before I could respond, his mother stepped back in. You're not going anywhere, young man. Dr. Hannah's agreed to see you in an hour. You need to take a shower and get ready to leave, she ordered. I'm sorry to kick you out like this, Juan, but we have an appointment. You can come by again tomorrow if you want, she said, before ushering me out. I made eye contact with Lewis one last time before she shut his bedroom door. He was scared. I walked the few blocks to my house, considering what my friend had told me. He had said something took her, but wouldn't tell me what. The more I thought about it, the more I thought there might be something to his story. Ma was gone. Of that, I was certain. She's a cute teenage girl who runs alone often. Perhaps it wasn't an it that took her, but a who. Someone could have just grabbed her off the street. Maybe that's what he saw down there in that tunnel. Some kind of kidnapper's hideout. I grabbed a long rope from the garage, a flashlight, and a few bottles of water. As I was stepping out the door, another thought occurred to me. I went back to my parents' bedroom and pulled the handgun from the nightstand. I know it was stupid, but I did it. It took some convincing, but I got Dylan to drive me back out to the missile site. Just wait here if you don't want to come down with me, I told him as we leaned over the hatch. I knew he was afraid to go down, and I didn't blame him. You really think Mara's down there? He asked me. Did you even know she was missing? I answered his question with a question. He shook his head. This whole situation was getting weirder all the time. There's something wrong with Lewis, Dylan said with perfect certainty. And I agreed. I'm just gonna check because he asked me to. Then I can tell him she's not there. She's probably just at a friend's or something, I explained. But I didn't really believe that. Fine, I'll wait for you. Just call me if you get into trouble or whatever. Don't take too long either. My parents don't want me out late," he said. I climbed down the rope into the cool tunnel and flipped on my light. The place looked just how it had before. Concrete walls, blank but for the graffiti that ends in the shaft, as if no one ever walked further into the place to paint. I started walking, taking the same turns I had taken that day with Lewis. This time, I brought a thick Sharpie and drew an arrow at each turn, pointing the way home. I know what you're thinking. I'm an idiot. That's definitely true. I should have just left this whole thing alone, but Lewis was so upset. I figured I could just take a quick look, then at least tell him she wasn't down there. I'd be giving him some amount of comfort for his missing sister. That's what I thought at least. Unfortunately, she was down there. As I neared the last turn from where I had found Lewis, I heard a noise. Something was moving around the corner, dragging itself along the rough, concrete floor. "Ma?" I whispered. The noise continued, unchanged by my calling out to it. I rounded the turn, and my light fell on a thin figure dragging what I recognized immediately as a body. I gasped reflexively as he let go of the legs. They fell flopping to the concrete. "You got here faster than I thought you would," Lewis said as he lunged at me, knocking me down and spilling the flashlight across the floor. Even before he had lost all the weight, I had easily 30 pounds on my friend. Still, he was able to maintain control as we struggled, drawing on some kind of mad strength. We rolled around on the dirty concrete for a few seconds before I managed to get my legs up between us. I pressed my feet into his chest and launched him away. He was strong, but his body was still so light. My hand found my father's pistol and I pulled it out and cocked it. As Lewis took his feet, his attack froze at the sound. I moved a couple steps back, keeping the gun aimed at him. I grabbed the flashlight and quickly put together what was happening. He had been dragging Ma somewhere deeper down the tunnel. And she was dead. My eyes jumped from Lewis to his sister's body. She wasn't just dead. She looked horribly injured. It was like something had torn her open and some parts were missing. "What the hell?" I said. As much as I tried to keep it steady, my pistol hand shook. There was blood on Lewis. "You weren't supposed to see her. I'm sorry. I was going to make it quick for you," he said quietly. "Make it quick? You were going to kill me?" I shouted. "I have to, Juan. I'm sorry. And Mariana, I'm sorry," he wailed suddenly. Lewis dropped to his knees and pressed his hands into his face. I heard his breath gasping out as he wept. "I don't know why I did that to my sister. I just did," he cried. "It tricked me," Lewis added between hitching breaths. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. "I was just so scared. It gave me something. Some kind of food down here in the dark," Lewis whispered. "What are you talking about? What food?" I wasn't following him. "But I don't think it was food. It tricked me into eating it. I was so scared and lost. Now I'm cursed. And I'm always hungry. Just like it is," he continued, disregarding my confusion. "I was supposed to bring Ma down here for it, but I couldn't. I was so hungry," Lewis said. It was starting to become clear why her body was missing parts. "Lewis, Jesus dude, what did you do? And then you. I thought I was strong enough to bring it down here to feed it. Then it would release the curse," he said shakily. "Lewis, let's get you back up. We can figure this out," I said, trying to control the situation. But I could hear the fear in my own voice. My friend just shook his head and looked over what remained of his sister. "No, I can't. I'm starving. I can't make it any further without eating," he whispered. He gave me a sideways look that I should have been able to read, but I wasn't ready for his move. My friend spun around and leapt at me, almost faster than I could compute. I pulled the trigger reflexively and kept pulling until it stopped. Lewis screamed once more, then slumped to the floor. I dropped the gun and ran to him. His breath was gurgling out the side of his chest. I rolled him over and he grunted as I did. "Thanks, bro," he said, and smiled up at me. "You have to kill it. It got me when I was vulnerable, but you're stronger than me. You can do it." "What are you talking about?" I asked him, but he didn't say anything else. His last breath bubbled out of the hole I'd shot into him, and that was it. I looked around the hallway where I sat with two dead friends and decided quickly that there was nothing else I could do, and the police would have to deal with everything. I stood, and as I turned to walk back to the hatch, I heard a sound. The tiniest whisper of breath ran across my neck. I swiped at it, spinning around and around. There was nothing there with me, but it felt like there was. "Juan, I have something special for you. Aren't you hungry?" A voice so gentle and faint, it almost wasn't a voice at all, found me down there in the dark. It was inviting, and I wanted to follow it, to see what treat it had for me. My light fell on Lewis, then on Ma, and I pressed my hand against my ears and ran. The rope was still hanging when I got to the hatch. Dylan had tied it to the top, and I climbed as quickly as I could. The air was dry and cool when I got out. Night had come while I was down there. "Dylan!" I shouted, then spotted his car. He popped out from the driver's seat and rushed to me. "Dude, what happened down there?" he asked. I spotted blood on his arm. "Lewis, he bit me," he said, still in shock. Sure enough, there was a human bite-sized chunk taken out of his arm. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said, and we did. They found Lewis's mother and her car not far from the missile site. She was dead, torn open and covered in bite marks. They haven't found Lewis yet, but they've confirmed his teeth marks on her body. The police are assuming he killed his sister as well, even though they haven't recovered her body. Lewis is on the run, could have even crossed the border already, or so they say. I told Dylan and Julian the whole thing. They didn't believe me at first, but Dylan came around pretty quickly. The bite on his arm helped him to understand. We drove out to the site for 2 days straight and filled the shaft with dirt and buried the hatch. It was hard work, but we had to do it. I was sorry to leave Lewis down there, and more sorry to leave Mariana. But it was better than letting anyone else go down there. I don't know what it is, the thing that cursed Lewis, as he said. Maybe it was just some kind of head injury or other madness. The sound of that inviting voice still comes to me though, and I don't think I'm crazy. I think it's real. Maybe it's some kind of opportunist creature we don't know about that found a nice, cool, dark spot to take up residence there in the tunnels. Or maybe it's something that has been there all along, and, like the Balrog, we dug into its deep place and let it out. Either way, we sealed it back down there. At least until the next idiots find an open hatch somewhere in the desert and dare each other to go exploring.